Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pints and Politics. We got Drew. We got Mike. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's
Good.
had a few days off. I went down to Kansas and spent a week at a silent retreat,
You went all the
which
way to Kansas for that. Oh my.
yeah, that was kind of interesting. But you know what? We kind of missed something too. You took a trip down to South America, and we
Yeah.
never really got the chance to talk about that much.
No, this would be in mid-May, actually. Yeah, it's a lot of hiking. I think when I got back, I mentioned something about how the old Inca used to do tax policy. I don't know if you remember. There's some
Mhm.
kind of tax policy because the Inca used to kind of like Pharaoh, they would let people pay their taxes in labor. That's how they got all them big fancy buildings made out of rock. But and then like yeah, and then modern tax policy is really interesting. Yeah, we did because we talked about property values.
But we never, I mean, wasn't there more to it than just that? We talked about the taxes. We didn't talk a lot about your trip, though.
No, because it was mostly hiking. It's mostly
Oh,
hiking. A lot of cool
oh,
things and
was it very humid? Was it
no. Actually
no?
no, it was very nice. The weather. But they were going into winter when I was down.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the temperatures were a little bit more cool. I've always expected, South America to be so much hotter.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very temperate, with that elevation and, close to the ocean.
Oh,
It was roughly around 60, 70 degrees the whole time. It
oh,
was
that's
really
pretty
cool.
nice.
Yeah, it was really neat. Yeah, and I guess yeah, we'll dive into it. The thing about the culture there, very Catholic from the Spanish colonization.
Hmm.
So we got saw a lot of Catholic art from like the 1500s, 1600s, which was neat. And I guess one thing, because you were down at a Catholic retreat, right? In Kansas?
I was.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that real soon too. But in Peru, there was one thing in Cuzco City, they were doing a procession, and I've never seen a procession done before. And
Hmm.
I don't think we do them in the States, but effectively they set up this big kind of display thing, and then they had a band play, and they carried a cross and laid it down, and all like a bunch of people who were part of the procession laid a bunch of stuff as offerings. And then they lifted the cross up so everyone could see it, and it's adorned with all kinds of like corn and potatoes and other plants. And then they do a big prayer, and then they take it away. And they did it all in front of the cathedral.
Hmm.
It was really interesting. I've never seen something like that before in my life.
So those are done even in Minnesota here and in
Okay.
different parishes and so forth. There was one that we used to attend. It was always for the Feast of Christ the King, and that was a public procession. It I would say it was probably almost a mile long procession.
My
And what they
goodness.
would do is they would start at a location and you would have singing and the pray the rosary, and then they made it to um like an altar, the temporary altar that they had set up. They would do benediction there or exposing of the Blessed Sacrament. And then once again, they would process to the next stage where you would sing, say more decades of the rosary, and then another benediction, blessing of the blessed or the exposure of the Blessed Sacrament. And then the last stage would be going back up to where they started. And that was at one time they would stop traffic on 71. There was one I think I'd posted on Facebook too that they had done it in Brainerd this summer or this spring, where there was a Catholic group that had done a procession and stuff. So you don't see it too often, but it used to be done. Almost every Catholic parish would have a procession at some time. But it's kind of a public profession of faith. And it's something that it's too bad they kind of got away from it or don't do it anymore. Because
Yeah.
when you see sometimes hundreds of people singing, praying, basically promoting their faith. I always thought it was an amazing thing. And
Yeah, it's
sometimes
real.
people
Yeah,
go
it's
ahead.
neat. And I think, I don't know, part of me feels like the government discourages that kind of stuff because, like you said, it would block traffic on 71, and which for those watching, 71 is a Minnesota highway that goes from the bottom of the state all the way up.
Hmm.
And that's, traffic. And I don't know. Maybe part of me thinks the government, they want that traffic for money, but that's just a assumption.
Well,
Because,
after the changes in the church, the Second Vatican Council, you saw less and less of that promotion of the Catholic faith, which is
okay.
really sad because those were the things that brought the communities together.
Yeah.
And now they don't do it.
Huh.
So,
Yeah, because what I saw down in Cuzco, like it was really neat. There was singing, there was dancing, there was praying, and it just seemed like there was a sense of community down there, and that they all basically said that this is what we believe, and that's how that kind of saying who they are as a
mhm.
people. Getting to see that and even sharing that was like really neat. But
And I think in some places, like in Mexico, that was almost outlawed for a while because in the
really,
1920s, there was a communist well, taking over of the government in Mexico, and there was a rebellion uprising against it. Um, you might have watched the movie or seen it. It's For Greater Glory. It was called. It was about the Cristeros. So when the communist government said that they could no longer practice their faith and they were shutting down churches and so forth, the peasantry, the people, said no, that's not going to work for us, and fought against the communist government. And some of the stories there are it's pretty interesting. Watch the movie if you get a chance.
yeah. What's
But
it called?
Viva Cristo Rey was there for greater glory.
For greater glory. Okay, I'll put it on the list.
Yeah, check it out if you
Yeah,
get a chance.
yeah. Well, that's
Yeah,
two themes that
it's a
we've
pretty good
talked
movie,
about
but there,
several times. Oh, sorry. It's two themes that
yeah,
we've talked about several
no
times.
problem.
Like
But
communism kills religion, and the government
yes,
nearest and closest to the people is the most effective, where the people just said, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to keep our faith. So it was a really interesting thing. Anyway, sorry to interrupt your point, Mike. Continue.
no, that's fine. It's you have to read the stories and hear some of the history of it. So it's really because I was thinking about this just recently, even before I went to this retreat, how we are still in a conflict with an atheistic communist drive to overthrow our country. I mean, there's so much of it that can be tied back to communist China. These riots and stuff, we've talked about that a little bit, where some of the funding, some of the money, the organization that's behind this is coming from the CCP. So the revolution, that communist push, is still very active. It's not like this has gone away. And then when
Yeah,
you see the Marxist, the atheist part of this, where they don't want you to promote your faith because a society that's got a faith will not fall for won't be easily duped. They have got higher standards and so forth. So it's it's still the battle is still going on against that communist push, which has been going on for 100 plus years already.
right. And it's funny you mentioned that going up against an atheistic society. You'll notice throughout every communist revolution, and I'm also going to throw the French Revolution in there just for kicks, but you see an attack on religion and like almost in order to kill religion. Like the government wants to replace it, right? So that way you don't have a sense of community. Everything goes to the central government that tells you what to do. And in the French Revolution, they got rid of their Catholicism and replaced it with the cult of reason, which was this science and trust the experts kind of a vibe.
Mhm.
And like, so don't talk to your neighbors, don't worry about, what you personally believe or what you may experience. It's all about what the government and what the bureaus tell you to do. And you saw it in the French Revolution. and then in every communist takeover, just in general. And there might be some exceptions that I'm missing. I don't know about the Venezuelan one if they outlawed religion, but Russia did, China did, North Korea did.
Right. That's Marx knew very well that faith was going to be his biggest adversary, and they've done a very good job of pushing back on that. He was definitely against the churches. He said that religion was the opiate of the masses, is how he called it. And if you are going to overtake a country, they are going if they're confused, if they don't have a deep religious upbringing or underpinnings, they were easier to overtake. So think about how, when you talk about government, how the role of government in those countries becomes, it basically overtakes the roles that the churches played in the past. We had orphanages, right? And those were generally run by religious institutions. You had um, homes for
Hospitals.
hospitals, homes for old people. Just most of those things were almost all done by churches. And then what's happened is the state has taken those over. I think it was Ben Shapiro who said it at one time too. He said the only reason that public schools were really started in the United States was to put parochial or religious schools out of business. And there's some truth to that.
Yeah,
That
that
was
makes sense.
competition.
Yeah, I had
So,
to bring up hospitals, by the way, Mike, because like I really want to get into your Catholic retreat that you're at.
oh,
But the Knights of St. John, like they were a crusader time and they participated in the Crusades and they set up a bunch of hospitals throughout Europe and Turkey and like the Middle East. And it was all part of the Christian faith bringing that with. And they were also crusaders. It's kind of neat. And they're still around too. They're the only crusader order, the Knights of St. John. They're basically just hospitals at this point.
okay.
So
I don't know
even
too
when
much about them. I really have never studied that a whole lot. Um, but there was so much of that stuff that happened in the ages of the church and how it progressed and it grew and it really brought, look what it brought to Europe. At the beginning, when after Rome and Greek and everything else, we're talking in the 200-300s, stuff like that. Europe was still pretty rough. There was people coming in from Eastern Europe and so forth. A lot of conflict. The church started to grow, and look, by the time you were hitting the 600-700s, you've got crusades already. I think 700 was the first crusade,
No, I
and
think the first crusade by Pope Urban was like, I want to say 1011.
was it?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was earlier than that, but
Ethan, we'll get a fact check on that and post it.
because I think Islam or Mohammedanism started in the 700s, and it wasn't very long after that when one of the first crusades happened. So you could be right, but anyways, look at how Europe had changed under that Christian guidance. The scientific principles, the architecture, the schools, all of these things were basically developed in Europe. And now they had influences from other places as well. It's not like they lived in a vacuum, but look at how much that country or that area of the world developed in a really short amount of time under Christian guidelines and principles and everything else. So it's kind of amazing. And one of the things that I was kind of compared it to was in Iowa, I think it is, they have these um I don't know what they call them, but basically on the ground, it's a snake. They used like a mound system to
Oh, like
to
the
put,
Indians?
yeah,
Okay.
that was
Yep.
done at about the same time at somewhere around that 1000, 1100, I think. That's what people in the United States or the Americas were building compared to the cathedrals. these huge, monstrous churches that were being built in Europe at the same time. The development is just amazing. So there was
Right.
development in other areas too, but they brought so much to European culture, the Catholics did, that you can't you can't not give them credit for what happened. But
Right.
with that, we're still in this conflict between, and it's been going on for quite some time, the attacks on faith from specifically the communists. Reagan, look at what his biggest push was as president, and even before president, was communist infiltration and um, the red threat, basically. And just because it's not, a unified country as the USSR anymore, doesn't mean that the same things still aren't happening. And the best reference I could probably give to people is there's a book called Unrestricted Warfare. And they talked about this was Chinese generals after the first um, Gulf War. And they looked at what happened with the coalition of the countries and they said, we will never take the United States over militarily. We have to do it another way. And how do they do that? And that's unrestricted warfare. That's by using infiltrating the colleges, infiltrating politics, infiltrating the media, and using those things as means to agitate. And that's basically communist revolution inside the United States. So when we see these groups in California, in LA, that are rioting, and they're rioting supposedly about immigration issues, but they're funded by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party.
Right.
And there's another gentleman, I shouldn't call him a gentleman, but a guy who has been helping organize this, and I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he has strong ties with the Chinese Communist Party himself. So when you see this time and time again, these connections with what China has done, and that's why people kind of give me grief for it, but I refer to Tim Walz as Comrade Walz. His ties with the CCP and the Chinese Communist Party are you cannot deny that.
Yeah.
I think 30 trips over there. So going back to the faith, and I kind of went long ways about this, but that was one of the things that was discussed quite a bit is how that constant attack on the faith and that Cristeros. So I mentioned those before. That's the movie For Greater Glory. And the Mexicans, the Latinos, who their grandparents, their great grandparents fought and died against communism because they wanted to keep their faith. Now they're being used as a tool by communists to create revolution and upheaval in the United States by the same people they fought against, less than 100 years ago or almost 100 years ago. So the
Right.
battle hasn't changed. The tactics definitely have.
Right. And I didn't really look into tactics today in preparation, but no, it's interesting you say that. But yeah, we see it time and time again. And yeah, essentially, China's trying to get communist revolution. And with the immigration thing is also a tactic. Any means by which you can divide a nation is a way to weaken it. If the people are divided and fighting themselves, and you've said it before when it comes to primaries, it's easier for an adversary to win over a house divided than against a house united. But I guess that's all I have on that.
Well,
It's
there's so
very
much.
common tactics. You see it over and over and over again. Communists are kind of relentless. The only thing bringing me joy is that, or comfort, is that when you look at the people who are like actually in favor of communism, they seem very like just in general weak. And so if you could just stand strong and stand up for your beliefs and not be afraid of people criticizing you for what you believe in, then you'll be okay. And actually, since we're talking about faith, I know I texted this to you, but I will read it again from First Peter. For it is better if the will of God be it, that you suffer for doing well than for doing evil. So essentially, you stand up for your beliefs. It is better to stand up for your values and stand up against evil than it is to just kind of get along or to give in to pressure it when that pressure is evil. Does that make sense to you, Mike?
It does, and I was sharing this with you before we got started here, how there's some representatives and myself every morning we send a biblical text. Everyone picks a different one. We send it and read it. It's comforting, and then you see what other people are reading, and then you get a chance to poke into some other areas of the Bible that you're not really looking at. So I think it's a really good thing. But faith and how motivational that is. And then you look at like the mental health issues in our country, in our world, and the correlation between people who have no religion, no faith, and a huge amount of mental health issues. You know, so we could probably prescribe all the drugs you want and it'll never solve the problem. You can probably go through all the therapists that you want and it will never solve the problem. But maybe what we should start doing is promoting the faith more.
Right.
A firm belief in something greater than yourself
Well,
can
with
carry you
faith, you
through
get
those
a
hard times in
therapist.
life.
Yeah, right. You get a therapist with
Oh,
faith. You go to confessional, right?
absolutely.
So you save a lot of money on therapy.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah, that's kind
Well,
of
the
the
priest is
that's my
there to
funny
help
joke
you.
about that. But
Well, look at the correlations between a therapist and the sacrament of confessional for a Catholic. Okay. There's a patient, um, doctor seal. They cannot talk about what's happened when they're in session, right? So basically, the same seal as the priest has. He cannot talk about what's gone on in the confession. Um, there was a list of them. When you look at it, Freud kind of copied the sacrament of confession with his therapist, with his was his idea of therapy. Um, you come into a secluded area and you get to talk about what is going on in your life, your faults, what you need to work on, and they give you advice.
Mhm.
How much more similarities do you need? It's basically the same thing, except Freud's, and I'm not a huge Freud fan at
Yeah,
all. He A lot of faults with him, but he
yeah, he has
copied
a
kind of the essence of what that's for.
yeah, yeah. No, it definitely like that style of therapy does copy it. You can see it. And then as far as Freud, he has a big Oedipus complex. That's all I have to say about him. Really is a big part of who he is.
Hmm.
But
And drug issues. He was a
I didn't
well-known
know about the
drug.
drug issues.
Oh yeah,
Good for him.
yeah.
Hope it was fun. Um, but anywho, Mike, tell us about your trip to Kansas. I didn't know you went to Kansas.
Okay. Um, I had gone on on a spiritual retreat when I was probably 15, 16, and that was a silent 3-day retreat, which when you're 15, 16 years old, something you probably are not that enthused about. But I went down with one of my other brothers. I went there and I thought overall it was a good experience. You go through, you contemplate, or you're given talks, you're given time to meditate, you go through a general confession and so forth. And this was the Ignatian retreat, and this used to happen, of course, much more common, probably hundreds of years ago, was actually a 30-day retreat. Can you imagine going on a spiritual retreat for 30 days? That'd be pretty difficult. And then not talking because it's a silent retreat.
Really?
So this is a condensed version. And there's lectures, there's talks, they're given time to meditate upon the topics, on the subjects. Then you get a little bit of free time, but it's a very ordered, very structured um, week, and it went extremely fast. I thought, anyways. Um, I enjoyed it. I did a general confession, and overall, it was very good experience. I met some people, and I'm hoping to have them on the podcast from England. They are,
Okay.
I say young people, but 24, 25 years old. And we got to talking at the end of the last night. So I was down there over the 4th of July week. And the last day, when everything was over, we set off some fireworks and we're talking. And these guys have an English accent, so we started talking and realized their interest in politics and so forth, and had a really good time just visiting with them. So I gave them my number and I said I'd like to have them on sometime and we can compare the differences. But their country and what they're dealing with is a little bit different than ours, but theirs has been overtaken. I think they're 5 or 6 of their biggest cities, the governors, our mayors, and all those towns are all Muslim.
Yeah.
And they're seeing this huge influx of, foreign born people into their country, and it's creating societal challenges. I'll just put it nicely. So they're seeing a lot of the same things that we are, but I say there's some differences though too, because primarily with the Latinos that are coming across the border, most of them are Christian based.
Right.
So I'm not worried about a issue so much. It's a cultural issue when you have two really opposing cultures.
Yeah, when
Where
they clash, it's like London, I think London's still the acid attack capital of the world. And
I
that's
believe
because of
so.
that cultural divide.
Right. Whereas you bring in Latinos primarily and their Catholic culture, we have way more in common than what divides us
Right.
with the Latinos. So I've always looked at that. Um, Granted, I think the tactics and the reason that mass immigration was done into our country was subversive. I think that was planned for a various of number of reasons, but um, going back to the retreat, I think it's something that I think almost everybody should have the chance and experience it. Maybe not a week long retreat your first time, but
Maybe a
if you can go,
weekend.
yeah, a 2, 3 day retreat somewhere.
All right. So I have to ask, it was silent. So you didn't say a single thing all week.
Um, I might have failed on that just a little bit.
Okay, well, you weren't supposed to.
Wasn't supposed to. My son was
Wow.
down, my son was down with me,
Yeah.
and there was a few times when I needed to talk to him, you know. So other
Yeah.
than no, I didn't speak. I asked the question.
That's crazy.
It is difficult,
Yeah, I
but
bet.
when you're sitting in those presentations, those discussions, and you're just sitting there and contemplating it. Now go take 15, 20 minutes at the end of it, and you can flip through the book, you can read the pages, you can do whatever, but now just in total silence, contemplate on what you just heard. Think about it, meditate on it. When you're not distracted with the discussion, it's kind of amazing.
Right.
So I would recommend it to anybody and everybody is take the opportunity to go do that and learn about the faith and learn about yourself as well. I think it's very positive.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. That's a really good thing. And I think that's a good way for us to wrap things up today. Because, yeah, you contemplate, you can just kind of think about what's going on. And then I'm assuming you weren't on your phone either. So you get that big social media break that would be so good for your mental health as well.
Well, there was the option to turn the phones in. Um, I had a little bit of texting that I did with one of my daughters that she's running the business while I was gone. Other
Yeah.
than that, I had no phone service. And no, I wasn't on social media. I didn't send any emails. I texted with her, I think, 3 times for the whole week, just to make sure that things were getting taken care of. And that's about it. I mean, talk about
Wow.
separating yourself from the world for, a week. It was pretty good. It really
That's
was.
awesome. That's really neat. That was so cool. Yeah, definitely. If you just honestly just taking a weekend with no phone, that would be really hard for a lot of people. But anywho, interesting talk today, Mike. I
Yeah,
really, yeah, maybe we'll get more into some of your trip stuff later, but it's all the time we have for today. Thank you all so much for watching Pints and Politics. As always, Representative Mike Weiner, Drew Peterson. God bless everyone.
take care.